Anxiety and depression. When I was first diagnosed with depression, the meds the doctor put me on were anti-anxiety medication. And I had no idea what this anxiety was, let alone what depression was. Back then I thought depression meant sadness. When people are sad, they say they're so depressed. And that's not what depression is at all. As I mentioned before, it's a chemical change in the brain that makes it difficult to sleep, and then with the anxiety, and then eventually that you lose joy for life. You don't want to do the things you normally do, and then after a while, if you've lived in that state long enough of anxiety, the depression, I guess, really shows when all you want to do is sleep. So you've gone from not able to get to sleep or stay asleep, that all you want to do is sleep. You could have a great night's sleep, and the next morning all you want to do is crawl back up under the covers and stay in bed all day. And trust me, I've been there. It was 5 weeks that's all I ever wanted to do, was crawl right back up to bed, even though I was on meds for sleeping and I was getting at least 8 hours sleep. I could sleep 23 and a half out of the 24 hours in a day when I was stuck in a depression, and not exercise and not do the things I enjoy and not eat properly, all things that I know better. But when you have an illness like a broken leg, we put a cast on it and it takes time to heal. When we have an illness like a broken brain or a brain illness, we need to give it time to heal. And sometimes we need to talk to people who can help us understand how that brain works. And that's where it comes to working with either a counselor or a therapist or a psychologist, or your family doctor, who might prescribe some medication for you. Or, in the case of myself, I was working with a psychologist and my family doctor, and they couldn't get me back to where I needed to be so I could get back to work. So I actually worked with a psychiatrist as well. And the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist is a psychiatrist is a medical doctor as well as being able to do psychology counseling. So a psychiatrist can prescribe medications. So the psychiatrist met with me, and then he worked with my family doctor and my psychologist to help me determine which meds would be best and what type of actions to work on through the counseling or the talk therapy. So this depression thing, I'm so depressed. Well, the concept of sadness gets really messed up with depression. I've never been a sad person. I'm quite blessed in my life. I have a better life than I ever expected to have. That was an interesting comment when I shared it with my psychologist years ago. Psychologists don't give us answers, they help us find the answers, which can be very frustrating at times. And when I said I have a better life than I ever expected, he asked the question, what kind of life did you expect, Kevin? And that's when I realized that I expected a pretty crappy life based on some of the things that happened to me in my childhood. It did take some time working with the psychologist to go back through and talk about the childhood and the things that kind of got stuck as a loop in my brain that just wouldn't stop over and over again. And, we had to talk about some things I'd never talked about before in my life, and I didn't want to talk about them, and I wasn't proud to talk about them. But it was through talking about them that I was able to finally understand them and then turn off the loop. There were other things I worked on. A fantastic book I worked on with a counselor, different than a psychologist. And the counselor, this book I worked on was last fall, and the book's called Mind Over Mood. And although I'm not a big fan of talking about the word mind, because although I have depression, anxiety, and panic attacks as my official mental disorders, I don't have mental illness, because I don't even have a mental. Like, this mind thing, I don't know where that term came from, but I have a brain, and under stress, good stress or bad stress, the chemicals in my brain get all awash and send me into this depressed state. So this book, Mind Over Mood, even though I don't like the word mind, it had me track my mood over the course of days. And what I found out after 4 or 5 days was the days I'd wake up when my mood was at about a 30%. I felt pretty crappy and I just couldn't get out of bed. I didn't feel like eating or showering or shaving or anything. And I just stayed in bed all day. As I filled out the mood chart later on, my mood went from 50% to 80% to 90% crappy. It just got worse and worse and worse. And what I found out on other days, if I made myself get out of bed, which is pretty hard to do if you understand depression, that having a shower is a big task to do when you're stuck in the woes of depression. But when I made myself get out of bed on the days I felt like 30%, after that, my mood got better and better over the course of the day, and I was feeling pretty happy by the end of the day, pretty joyful. So understanding the pattern allowed me to break the habit that had started subconsciously to say, I feel crappy this morning. It's going to be a crappy day no matter what I do. I'm going to stay in bed. And when I broke that pattern and made myself get up, all of a sudden the day started getting better. And after a week or two, I had a new habit. And that habit was wake up in the morning and enjoy the day. And easier said than done. This took a lot of years by the time I got there. But tracking your mood can really help understand how to break the cycle of depression. Remember, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I am trained in mental health first aid for adults who interact with youth. And the things I share because they've worked for other people as well as me. And hopefully, through those examples, they can help someone else. That's my goal. That's all for now.